Everywhere at 5, we're tracking a troubling crime trend here in Ohio. More and more children dying as a result of domestic violence.
New data shows in most cases the perpetrator has been the victim's parent. Investigator Mike Mason is live with the staggering statistics. Mike.
Chris, Tiffany, for the last 8 years, the Ohio Domestic Violence Network has been counting domestic violence-related fatalities throughout the state. While the overall numbers of fatalities hasn't gone up, the coalition says the number of kids getting killed is the highest since they began keeping track. A new report released today by the Ohio Domestic Violence Network shows 22 children were among the 112 people who died in domestic violence incidents between July 1st of 2022 and June 30th of this year. Of those 112 deaths, 34 were perpetrators and 78 were victims. The victims range in age from 92 years to just 4 months old. According to ODVN, 17 children were killed by their parents or step-parents. Teen dating violence was also a factor in the deaths of 2 girls ages 15 and 18 who were shot and killed by their 18-year-old boyfriends. Some of those cases involved repeat offenders like Anthony Kennedy of Cleveland. You might remember him. He pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison this past June for fatally shooting his girlfriend in the head. Records show he was previously arrested in 2019 for strangling another girlfriend in Cleveland. ODVN says in most of these cases, there were warning signs. 65% of the victims had tried to get help by contacting law enforcement or the courts to report violence or threats of violence. And at least 24% of the cases, the victim was ending the relationship when they were killed. And while most of the victims were killed with guns, 22% died from strangulation or traumatic brain injuries. And according to ODVN, earlier this year, Ohio became the last state in the country to make strangulation a felony offense. But there is some good news to report. For the 3rd year in a row, ODVN says no law enforcement officers were killed in the line of duty during these incidents. And in all 48 cases where the perpetrator survived, they have all been criminally charged. Live in the newsroom, Mike Mason, 19 News. Chris.